Welcome to our first ever podcast edition of Why Blank Lost for Big Brother. I'm David Bloomberg, and in case you don't know me, I've been writing or talking about Big Brother, Survivor, and other reality television for 20 years. And I owned and ran the Reality News Online website for many years. With me as we begin our leap from one show to another is a real rock star, Jessica Lewis from Survivor, Millennials versus Gen X.
Thank you so much for bringing up that rock again.
Yeah, I have to.
Yes. Hi, everyone out there that might not know me as well. I am from Survivor, Millennials versus Gen X, and I have been a huge Survivor fan for many, many years, as long as the show has been on. And Big Brother was another one of those reality TV shows that I started watching as well. And now I get to podcast about it. So I got to experience Survivor, podcast about that. I get to watch Big Brother and get to podcast about it. So this is exciting. This is a really new treat, and I hope that we are able to meld the two worlds together nicely.
Yes. And on our Big Brother podcasts, you may notice if you're watching this instead of just listening, we're going to have a guest each week, some of whom you'll know, some who will be new names to RHAP. This week, we have a person you definitely know if you are a longtime Big Brother watcher. The guy who told me when I interviewed him after he'd just been voted off of Big Brother 11, I'm not really a rat. I just play one on television. Ronnie Talbot.
Yay!
Hi, David. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Ronnie.
That's true. I did say that. And even like I told you, I read your website religiously.
You are a smart guy, because I wish I had done the same before I went out and played Survivor. It wasn't until after I played that I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. Yeah.
Well, he does, but it didn't help me much. I forgot a lot of it.
But at least you were prepared, right?
Yes.
You had done the research.
I had. It was all my fault.
Oh,
Now,
well.
Ronnie, for anyone who might not know you, do you want to further introduce yourself?
I was, like you said, I was on Big Brother 11. I'm infamous for playing both sides of the house. And they called me the square root of all evil on the show.
That is the best. I love it. What a great name. Oh my God. You should put that on a t-shirt if you haven't already.
Finale night for my season, I actually had a shirt that had all evil inside the square root symbol.
That's perfect.
And I donated it to charity, and they sold it for like $3,000.
Oh my goodness.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's incredible. Good for
Yeah.
you. That's really great. Love it.
Yeah. Now, we decided that Ronnie should be our first guest because he and I have a long history. While Ronnie was on the show, one of our live feed recappers heard him mention the Reality TV Hall of Shame, which was a sister site to Reality News Online. So when he was voted out, I asked him about it in our exit interview. And as Ronnie just said, he religiously read my website and all the articles. And so in this regard, he was somewhat like Rob Sesternino, who studied up on my articles before playing Survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I remember her saying, I'm not getting inducted, am I?
That's right. That's exactly what you said. I was like, no.
Oh, I love that there's inductees. There was a whole thing. I missed it.
There is, or was. Now, this was another very good reason, Ronnie, for you to be our first guest, because Ronnie's familiar with the rules we use as a basis for these podcasts. In fact, much the same way, Jessica, you enjoyed my podcasts in your Survivor season, which led up to you co-hosting. After Ronnie read Why Ronnie Lost, which I wrote before talking to you, so I wasn't biased in any way. You said, I think your article on why I lost was good.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was spot on. I mean, I call it for what it is, even when I can't call it anyone else. I'm not going to call out myself, right?
That's right.
Well, I had the same reaction when I heard him talk about my game. I was dying because I was like, he really knows what he's talking about. And he became like my biggest defender because it was kind of a weird set of circumstances. So when I was asked to go on Rob's, RHAP, like a special, extra like interview,
deep dive interview.
Yes, I would only do it if David Bloomberg was on it too. And he did it. He came on. So it was so great. So that's where it all began.
Jessica, I have to say, I watch Survivor every season, and I want to say I absolutely, even though it was your undoing, I commend sticking to
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it would have been so easy to be like, you know what?
And if I had done that, I'm done. Like, you're not winning the game at that point.
Right.
And I knew that, and I went out there to win. So it's like, well, this is it. This is the moment. Either I go home or I hopefully win the game. Unfortunately, I went home, and Adam, who also picked rocks, ended up winning. So, I do. So thank you.
That's Survivor history. I don't think that's ever happened since, has it?
No, that was the third time, and I was the lucky number 3. So there's 3 of us in that rock Hall of. Is it Hall of Fame? Would that be in the Hall of Fame?
We'll go with Hall of Fame.
All right, good. I'll take it.
Now, Jessica, much like you ended up joining me on the podcast, Ronnie not only knew about Reality News Online, but he actually wrote for Reality News Online, starting just a few months after he had been on Big Brother 11. He had a column called A Gamer's View for Survivor Heroes versus Villains and Amazing Race 16.
Yes. Oh, that's so much fun. This is I love this going back in time with all of the things you've written, because I again was unaware of all of this. So this is great. I love this. It's like the tea.
So now, I mentioned the rules. I've mentioned them a couple times now. And for listeners, viewers who may be new to this podcast, you came upon us because it's a Big Brother podcast, or if you're not new and you just want a refresher, our discussion each week will be centered on the player who was voted out. We will analyze their gameplay using what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and sometimes even including interviews that I did with these all-stars back when they were in their original seasons. Then we'll look at all that in comparison with a set of guiding rules I originally wrote in 2004 and have modified a number of times since then, including the most recent version that I just completed and which is posted at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules.
Get ready to read a lot, people.
It's shorter than the Survivor
rules. It is shorter than the Survivor rules. Yeah. I will say that.
I took out a lot of the examples to condense it down there.
It's all good info.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I actually started writing the Why Blank Lost columns for Big Brother in Big Brother 2, but I didn't compile the official set of rules until before season 5. And those of you who are familiar with our Survivor podcast will see many overlaps in these rules, because while it might not be obvious, there is actually a fair amount of similarity in the way both games should be played. Yes, Big Brother dresses everything up in slime and unitards and big twists. Riding bananas, people wearing stars.
It's ridiculous.
It is. I'm sorry, but I'm going to just stop you for a second.
That's why we love it, because it's ridiculous.
Yes.
I know the bananas. I was like, what is happening right now? They're actually riding bananas. Like, that was a little bit much.
Yes.
My season, they were crawling through pig crap. Literal pig crap.
God, no.
Yeah. But with all of that said, it is still at its heart a strategic social game.
Yes, that rides bananas.
We'll talk about each rule a bit.
I'm sorry.
You're good. As we go through them today. But I am sorry to say, Survivor, people who have listened to the Survivor podcast, there is no appendix in the Big Brother set of rules that talks about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. So nobody has to worry about that. Rob Sesternino doesn't have to try and wrap his mind around that. It's not, it's not in these rules.
Rob was almost on Big Brother.
He applied to Big Brother.
Yes.
Oh, that's where originally that's what he was applying for.
Yeah.
I knew that before going in too. That's how much I read. I knew that.
You read a lot. I'm impressed. I like this.
Now, before we talk about why Keesha lost this time, I did want to mention, I did say, for those of you who are new, I said we focus on the person who loses, but of course we always have to talk about other things that have happened. And so this time I wanted to mention something I found when I went back to look at my interview with Keesha after she was booted from her first season. She was pissed off at Memphis. And she told me she felt betrayed and hurt by what he did. She felt she always had his back, and he wouldn't have even still been there had it not been for her. So I'm sure in the intervening years they've made up. But I do have to wonder what she thought when she realized Memphis was the only other person from her season there.
Yeah. Well, he was the deciding vote to send her out, wasn't he, on her original season? Like, wasn't he the one that made it official, if you will?
That was Final Four, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Did he win the final veto that time?
I feel like he was the one that was the deciding factor, if
Yeah,
I'm
I think so
remembering
too.
correctly.
That's why she
I
was
don't
so
remember.
pissed.
But
Yeah.
that would make sense. That would make total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it had, and I really feel like, unfortunately, when you have returnee seasons, whether it be Survivor or Big Brother, there are going to be those relationships that you formulate when you play with someone. And that can either be a great thing for you or a huge hindrance. It all depends on how that relationship was. And for her in Memphis, clearly, things did not end well between the two of them since he caught her as he did. And so I'm sure it was very, very hard for her when she walked in and realized that's who she's playing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Ronnie, without comparing Kevin to Keesha just yet,
okay,
what do you think about how your former housemate has been doing so far?
I don't think I'm going to keep it real. I've already been accused of being Kevin biased because, well, in a way, I am.
No,
I mean,
you have to be a little bit, right?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Molly, please don't. Sorry, my cat was going to step on the power button on my computer. But Kevin, I played with him, so I have a whole deeper understanding of him as a player. And he is not playing this season like he did my season. And keeping it real, he's not playing anywhere near as good of a game. Because his play style hasn't had a chance to manifest yet. He's not an in-your-face player like I was, or like many people this season are.
Yes.
So he was able, because of so many of us, our season, we were so aggressive. He was able to set back and let things happen, and that's not an option this time.
No.
we might have some discussion about that as we go through here when it comes to the person who lost. Now, I did want to mention, Jessica, of course, was a Survivor player, knows Survivor in and out, has been watching Big Brother, but I think with her new introduction to some of the aspects of it, like the live feeds and seeing things out of order.
Oh my God.
I just want to share one little bit where Jessica sent me a message, and it was after episode 1 had aired and the live feed was on. And she's like, why is a woman running around in a star suit? They have not explained this. What is going on here?
I had no idea. But it's one of those things where, like, I'm now realizing, like, I'm gonna know stuff ahead of time, so it's nothing like Survivor where there's no spoilers throughout the week. Like, you have to wait the entire week until it happen. And so I was so confused, and I was like, I'm scrolling through Twitter. I'm like, maybe somebody can tell me what's going on. Like, maybe there's a thing in here. And then I started watching the live feeds, and eventually I was like, okay, now I'm catching up. And then I obviously saw it in the episode, but it reminds me just how different Survivor and Big Brother really are, not just because of the live feeds, but because they dress people up like stars.
Janelle's lucky. One season, when Casey got the costume punishment, we're like, now we're going to evict you wearing it.
Oh, yeah, that's rough. That's like a rough way to get sent out. Like, you're in full costume regalia. Bye. It's nice to see you. Yeah, that.
Yeah, it was funny. There are a number of survivors who have been watching Big Brother for the first time. Now, this is not Jessica's first time, but a number watching for the first time. Like you were talking about seeing things before they happen on the show. Davey from Survivor David versus Goliath was on Twitter saying, so let me get this straight. You guys know everything that's going to happen, but you still watch the TV show.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It is, and it's crazy. And I will say this too. I know that we're not talking about Keesha yet, but because now that I've been introduced to the live feeds, I do feel a little bit like I'm a stalker, because I'm literally watching people in a house like sit on a couch whispering and talking about other people. So there's a whole lot of gossip mongering going on. And I get bored sometimes and I'm like, next room, what else is happening? But I mentioned this to David earlier. If I hear one more person claim they cannot remember who they heard say a particular thing when they're talking to someone else, I swear that I'm like, really? You're such a bad liar. Like, you totally know who said it, or you're making it up completely to try to get somebody in hot water and create some drama. But it's amazing how many times you hear them say, I can't, who said it? I mean, I heard, I can't remember. I don't, but this is what I heard. Don't tell anybody, but this is what I heard, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's incredible.
There was a castmate of mine, Jessica, that said that when we were in the house, and she looked like, I don't remember. And I always responded, you remember.
Yeah, you absolutely remember. You have nothing else to do but talk about each other. You absolutely remember, for sure. Yeah. So that fascinated me. I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to just call it like, that's bullshit. You know, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it.
They just don't want to get in trouble. They know.
Right.
Right.
Oh, for sure. It's just you're stirring the pot, right? That's what you're doing. You're stirring the pot. You're trying to make things happen, but you don't want to be the one that's going to name a name. Oh, yeah, for sure.
And you know what, though? Circling back to like the differences between Survivor and Big Brother, what I always tell people, and I don't know, because Survivor fascinates me. You guys, don't you vote the night after you lose the competition?
It's the same day, yeah.
Usually.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be in the previous, like very early on, they would do the next day. So you had like an entire day to like kind of, decide who's going to get voted out. But they'll do the competition in the morning and, whoever loses. And then that night by sundown, you're voting.
Okay. Yeah. See, on Big Brother, once the nominees are finalized, you have 72 hours till you vote.
Wow.
That's what got me in trouble my season. So
you had too much time.
I have no way of knowing, but I always joke and hypothetically say, if I had been on Survivor, I probably may have done better because my style was very Cobra Strike fast.
Yes, that's what you need when you play Survivor. That's the way that you have to approach it. That last minute decision could be the one that is actually going to switch everything around, because that's the best time to do it. Is you wait until the very end and then you throw the dagger and then you tell someone this is what's happening. So there's no time to change the plan. But unfortunately, and the other thing too, and I don't know if they do this with Big Brother, is we have lockdowns, so you can't talk to anybody anymore. So I don't know if they do that in Big Brother. Okay, so they do the same thing.
Sometimes we're allowed to talk to each other, but you have lockdowns. I would say, and we're probably going to get into this with Keesha, but without digging too much, because we're probably going to talk about this. The problem is, I think on BB, people generally have their minds made up by a certain point, and it's hard to weigh that.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got 72 hours to discuss it and figure it out, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Before we go ahead and focus all our attention on Keesha, did either of you two, have anything else you wanted to talk about from this week?
No, I think we got it all out there. We talked about the bananas and the star costumes, which, by the way, Janelle rocked. I will say that.
She did. She's beautiful. She's gorgeous.
And her walking into the safety suite, like shedding her coat, like nobody's business. Like, I was like, yes, I love it. So she's a rock star.
All right. Keesha showed up at Big Brother All-Stars with among the fewest connections compared to everyone else, but she had over a week to change that. What did she do too little? What did she do too much? And were there any lessons she should have learned from her first season? Keesha said in one of her interviews, "Nobody ever gave me a reason why I would be the first one out. So that really bothered me." Well, we don't want her to continue being bothered. So we will give her the reason why she was the first one out. It's time to determine why Keesha lost.
It's like we're doing her a favor, right?
We are. We are a public service.
We love you, Keesha, if you're watching.
We do.
Now, the first rule says to scheme and plot, as my newly updated rule says, Despite the fact that recent juries have often voted according to emotion rather than seemingly considering strategy, this rule is still the most important of them all, not just for winning, but for staying in the game and maneuvering through it. Of particular importance for Keesha is the part of the rules that says, from the very beginning, you have to start making alliances and cementing relationships. It can be difficult to know whom you can trust after just a couple days or even hours sometimes, but if you don't start fast, you'll be watching from the comfort of your own living room like the rest of us.
Mhm.
Guess where Keesha is right now?
Yeah, in her living room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when it comes to Big Brother, you almost never get the vast majority of people to agree on anything, from social media to podcasters and so on. But if there's one thing just about everybody has said about Keesha's week, it's that she simply didn't do enough.
Yeah.
And I include Keesha herself in that, because she told Dalton Ross that she should have talked to Cody the first night, but she was afraid if she talked to him that would put her out there and make her a target. She laid low and she shouldn't have.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to throw you off here, Ronnie, but I do think that it was something that was also discussed in her exit press was the pace of the game. And maybe Ronnie can speak more to this. I mean, because you've already kind of touched upon it when you were talking about Kevin, is that I do feel like she was kind of in a new space where there was a much faster game playing with people that played much more recently than she did. And I think she was out of her element.
Well, something of particular relevance to Keesha herself to mention, Molly. That's the same cat that Jeff said, whose fucking cat is that?
Yeah.
Anyway, in season 10, Keesha's original season, remember week 1, we saw the guy who overplayed his hand go home. So she was almost, her personal experience told her, don't do that. Don't do that. And that was a bad inclination to have, because like we said, these are not new players. These are all stars. And like we've covered, they came into the house with pre-existing relationships. And she didn't have those strong bonds necessarily that everyone else had. And in Big Brother, if you're not the one making the deals, you're the one being held to the deals. And she should have been up there. And if she didn't want to throw anyone else under the bus, that's great, because I get that. But she at least should have been, Cody, I can be a vote for you. Tell me who to vote this week. It's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I do think that she really, the laying back was part of her biggest problem. And also, I think added to her just being a target, because she was they kept talking about the easy votes. Yes. And she was considered an easy vote because she wasn't really trying to do much of anything. And I feel like Kevin fell into that too, where they were both kind of, viewed as, well, that's not going to cause a ripple effect. No one's going to get too hurt. They don't really have anyone, so we're fine. So they really walked themselves into being put up on the block.
Yeah. And Kevin is in that same vein as Keesha also. And like you would say, the easy vote. Kevin is not plugged into the Big Brother fan alumni community a lot. He didn't have those connections either.
Right.
So you're right. Keesha was an easy option for the same reasons.
Yeah. But even after she was nominated, she still laid low. She only had a few solid allies, and even some of them were getting annoyed with the fact that she was barely campaigning. She was doing things like offering food or use of the HOH shower if she won next week. Telling Cody he smelled good. She told Mike Bloom in her interview that she kept waiting for Kevin to mess up. And, maybe that could work if you're up against somebody who's a known loose cannon. But that wasn't the case. Though I will say it almost started to work right near the end, because he was beginning to overpromise. But that was too late, and her effort to get things flipped because of it was too little. For most of the week, she just seemed lost. Like she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to make any waves, but she needed to be splashing all over the place.
Right. And she even had people, I think Janelle was one of the ones telling her who to go and talk to. I'm pretty sure it was, literally giving her an instruction. You need to go and talk to these people about, and like, she was still very kind of like, about doing it. And that's a really bad sign. If you're having someone else tell you how to play your game, you're clearly not playing your game. And they're like giving you like almost like here's your help, here's your guidance. Like I'm trying to save you, but if you're not willing to save yourself, then I'm not willing to put my neck on the line for you. So it's really just it's sad to see that that's what ended up transpiring.
Oh yeah, and I watch the feeds just like you guys do, and after nominations happened, where Keesha and Kevin got put up, I was watching when they came back on, and I saw Kevin talking to Cody in the HOH, and that's when I was like, it's done. I don't even know what's going to happen from this point forward, but having played Big Brother, it's done. Kevin was already in Cody's ear. He was already telling Cody, he was plotting. He was saying, hey, I don't care that you, even though it may not be true because we don't know what's really in Kevin's head, right?
Right.
But he's telling him, I don't care that you nominated me. I just want to stay. I don't care. And I heard Keesha say, well, I guess I should go talk to Cody now. I'm like,
yeah, that should have been immediate.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in my original Why Keesha Lost column from her first time playing, obviously she made it a lot further, but even then I noted I didn't see much in the way of long-term planning from her. She didn't seem to have a plan for what would happen in Final 5, Final 4, Final 3. She just seemed to assume that she and her group of friends would stick together and move along. And in many ways, that thought seemed to apply here as well. She thought she'd make some friends and she'd be fine, but that's not the way it happens.
Yeah.
no.
And I think I really do think that people were like trying to help her. But if you don't want to act like the wounded puppy that needs to be saved. You want to be taking that in your own hands, your fate in your own hands, and showing them that you can play the game. And if they're questioning your ability to do so, you're not going to be a strong alliance for them moving forward, regardless of what food you offer or promises of a shower. That's not going to matter. They want to know that you've got their back and that they can rely on you and that you will be voting with them. That's what they want to hear. And she wasn't saying any of the right things.
Right. And I'm not surprised, David, for you to say that Keesha said she kept waiting for Kevin to mess up, because historically speaking, in terms of Big Brother, that's always how week one goes.
Yeah.
You just don't make waves, and they're just going to mess up.
Yeah.
But these aren't newbies. These are veterans who know better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And going to what you said, Jessica, Keesha told Mike Bloom that she promised Cody she wouldn't go after him. So she didn't want to go around promising other people something that would contradict it, because she didn't want to break a promise so soon. But she wanted to be able to hold up whatever she said. But you can't have those kinds of morals pretty much any time in the Big Brother house, but especially when you're already the nominee in the first week. The first rule says the key is to find some way to create alliances that will keep you around until you can figure out your full strategy later. Later in the game, you can rework alliances according to what is necessary to stick around. But early on, you should make use of whatever relationships you can scrounge up. The one thing you definitely do not want to do is isolate yourself. That's a sure way to get booted.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Now, one question that comes up is why Keesha just couldn't seem to pull it together. She said in interviews that she didn't know a lot of the cast. You guys have already referenced that. But she said it because she hadn't seen the newer seasons, while most of them knew each other. And the way that I've heard it is Keesha was almost certainly an alternate, so she didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of studying ahead of time. But I do wonder why she didn't spend her 2 weeks of quarantine watching some of the newer seasons. Then at least she might have known Tyler's name, or was that Taylor or
Taylor?
Trevor?
Called him Taylor, I think.
Yeah.
It was Taylor.
But this does also lead to another topic that I know you want to discuss, Ronnie, and that's pregame alliances.
Yes. I'm not. This is going to sound awful, but it's just. I'm just going to say it, and it'll sound how it sounds, I guess. I don't dislike him, but I don't talk to Dan Giesling. I don't talk to Derek, but Cody and Memphis were their number twos in their respective seasons. And I think it's just naive to not think you know what I mean? So why on earth would Keesha assume? Because to my knowledge, she never really had any conversation with Memphis. Like, we have something official, right? So why would she just assume she's cool with Memphis.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that from someone else who's been on a reality show that sometimes when you walk away from the show, the relationships that you have with certain people who were on the show with you might not be that great. And, something that you might have done, for whatever reason, they're bothered by it, but they don't necessarily express it to you because in their mind, they're like, well, we're walking away from this and we're done. We don't have to live together anymore. And so everybody kind of moves on. But unless you are maintaining that relationship with someone, you don't know what they really think about you because you never talk to them. And you can't assume just because you live together in a house or because you're on an island together that suddenly when you come together, it's going to be all hunky dory. And I really think it was a terrible assumption for her to make, especially since he's the one who cut her, so she completely forgot about that part too, that like he got rid of her. So she should have been questioning that relationship immediately and assuming the worst instead of expecting the best.
When I was nominated on the show, and I kept wanting Keesha to do this, I kept using the exact verbiage when I approached people for a vote of saying, I don't ever want to assume that I have your vote. So I'm going, do I have your vote? How can I get your vote? She literally never said that. Not anything like it. She didn't try and get a vote. She didn't even campaign on a platform of, I don't know anyone, so I can be scooped up as an ally. Me. I didn't hear any reason from her for why she should stay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can, I think, move on to the second rule, which tells players not to scheme and plot too much, to keep their scheming secret and not to backstab until they absolutely need to. In general terms, this rule notes that if you spend all your time scheming and plotting and you try to scheme and plot with everybody, they will all eventually know what you're up to. Now, since we just spent a fair amount of time talking about how she didn't scheme and plot enough, this obviously wasn't a problem overall for her. But it does bear mentioning that it seemed like one strike against Keesha was that she was seen as being aligned with Janelle. And since a number of players were against Janelle, they didn't want to keep an ally of hers around. And so this rule does talk about obvious duos. Now, I don't know that you would say these two were an obvious duo. I think Janelle and Keesha are more of an obvious duo, but this would add on to that. I don't think this absolutely killed her chances, but it didn't help either. And of course, it wouldn't have been so obvious if Keesha had done more lobbying for herself. So Janelle wouldn't have needed to make it so obvious that they were working together.
Right.
And
how about too, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place to mention.
You're already rule jumping?
I'm not rule jumping, I promise. Because I'm thinking about Janelle, right? So people think that she has some relationship with Janelle, and this is something that she talked about in some of her exit press was the safety suite, and she didn't know that that they were going to be, that Janelle was going to be going in there and that Keesha was going to be going in there. And she found out like at the last minute that they were both going in and she had left her card, I guess, that you can swipe at the door downstairs. So I feel like that is another one of those situations where, if people think that you are with these people and then those two people are the ones that are going into the safety suite, you're in trouble at that point. And I think she did realize that like, oh, that was kind of a screw up right there because if they're assuming that you're with them and then all of a sudden those two are the only ones competing, well, then you're going to be the next one in line, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that really is a big thing that hurt her last week was when they got that safety, he had to go to 3 and 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Speaking of going to 3, we'll go to the third rule, which talks about the need to be flexible, which is especially important in Big Brother. Now, of course, this is also rule 3 in the Survivor rules, but for Big Brother, it's even more so because of all the twists and turns that get thrown at the players. In my column on why Keesha lost her first season, I noted that one major point of this rule is you can't tie yourself to one alliance and hope that it survives. Now, back then, now I literally have it in like bright red, bold face, that line. But the thing with her is once on that first season, once her foursome formed, that was exactly what she did. She didn't appear to look for alternatives or other ways of approaching the end game. And while she certainly didn't have an end game to worry about this time, I feel there was still a similarity because of what we talked about earlier regarding her saying she didn't want to promise Cody one thing and then make promises to other people. She tried to hitch her wagon solely to Cody. But in many ways, Cody's job was done after he nominated her. I mean, I know the HOH still wields power and people want to please the HOH, but his job was done. She needed to be looking for other options, but she focused so heavily on Cody, talking in interviews about how she made sure to put herself near him as much as possible and stuff like that, and didn't focus on anyone else.
No, and this is a newer style of thinking in more recent seasons of Big Brother, because my season, definitely, the moment that veto meeting was over, the HOH has no power aside from the weeks where there could be a tie vote. If there's a tie vote, yes, you still want to stay in the HOH's good graces because he or she may be the deciding vote and you staying or going. However, that was not the case this week. So the moment that veto meeting was over, Cody was powerless. It was done. He's a sitting duck for the next week. So promising him anything at that point in time was a waste of energy.
Yeah, and I was going to actually ask you about that because it did seem like there was way too much emphasis on him. So I was curious if there was a good reason for it that I was missing, but I really couldn't see one because it didn't appear as if, other than the veto competition that he's definitely competing in, I highly doubt he's taken her off the block, so there's not going to be any options there. So it did seem like a very wasted effort to really kind of put all of your eggs in that one basket when that person has already put you on the block. Like, you need to talk to other people. You need some other people in your corner.
Yeah, she had Jeanette. Gosh, my memory's a little fuzzy, even though it's only been a few days. But she had Janelle Kaser's vote. She really should have been talking to Ian and Nicole A. And she should have been taking those big question marks, and she should have been wooing them. She should have been, saying, "How can I get your vote?" How can I, but she didn't.
Right.
And that's like a flexible thing, like you said. You got to be flexible. And I know this circles back to Rule 1 and 2 to some degree, but she needed to be willing to make whatever deal she had to in order to stay, because it literally doesn't matter what deal she makes if she's not there.
Right,
for sure. And the other thing, too, that I think might be worth noting here is because of the veto competition, you have the possibility of being taken off the block by someone. Right. So that's another reason why you want to keep your options open. You want people to have your back because you could be saved at that point as well. I mean, I don't know if that is something that happens very often because that person then kind of puts a, red flag on themselves, but that's something else that she should have been mindful of as well. And at least you saw Kevin trying to do that. Yes. he was trying to get people to potentially take him off the block if they were part of the veto competition, which we didn't see that from her at all.
Right. And that's something unique to Kevin. I know the veto does get used. I don't feel comfortable saying often, but you do see certain seasons where it's used more often than others. My season, it was used fairly often. And specifically, we were real big on saying, hey, if I pick you, will you save me? Hey, if I pick you, will you save me? And so I was not surprised to see Kevin doing that at all.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. That's kind of where he got that from then.
Yeah. All right, we can move on to the fourth rule, which tells players not to let their emotions control them, whether it's positive emotions like friendship or negative ones like anger. In her first season, I said her overall plan seemed to be to hang out with the people she liked rather than thinking about who she could beat, thus putting emotional play ahead of strategic. In her brief stint this time, she once again seemed to be playing emotionally, worrying about people she liked and being nice, though she really didn't have time to worry about her emotions controlling her overall.
Yeah.
She even said it on her eviction, when she gave her speech. She said, I feel this, and I might be paraphrasing here, but she said, I feel this energy around me. And she had said that for really 2 days before the eviction. She had said, I just feel this negative energy and like no one really wants to talk to me. And I kept saying, even though Kevin's my friend, as a viewer, I kept saying, so do something.
Right. Yeah, go talk to people.
Yeah, talk to someone. Say, what's going on? I'm feeling this. Is that accurate? How can we change that, you know?
Yeah. I did feel like both of them were way too emotional. And I mean, Kevin, super sweet, wonderful guy, but like lots of very sad faces and very just it's all over his face, like very just downtrodden and sad. And I feel like she was kind of the same way. And it's again, it's almost like a defeatist attitude they both had. I mean, and at least, you know, Kevin was trying to work his magic as much as he could, but I feel like you got to really kind of, and I could be wrong. I don't know if it's the wrong way to present yourself in the Big Brother house, but you want to show that you've got some backbone and you've got some fight in you. And I felt like they were both just like, kind of like, okay, this is what's happening.
It's kind of a razor's edge, Jessica, because, and again, gosh, this is really so interesting because with it being all-stars, not only these outside relationships, but you bring with you, and Kevin even said this, the baggage you bring from your previous seasons, right?
Yes.
So this requires some specific knowledge about Big Brother 11 and what Kevin and I experienced in the house together. Kevin said on the feeds one day, and please, if you're watching this, do not misunderstand, I am so appreciative of the experience. I love Big Brother. I would never change having done it for anything in the world. But our season was very traumatic. We fought a lot. David, is that fair to say? We fought a lot. A lot. I probably had the most tumultuous, traumatic HOH in show history.
Wow.
I was ostracized for 72 hours in the HOH room by myself. Harassed nonstop by another cast member. So, and Kevin went through that. And so, well, he lived through that. He saw it. So when people say Kevin wasn't like this in Big Brother 11. Yeah, he was. This is Kevin. But Kevin didn't have to be vulnerable like this in my season originally. Because Kevin hid behind us much more aggressive players. So now he can't do that. And because of that, he's vulnerable. He has to, you know, and me knowing Kevin the way that I do, being good friends with him, you know, Kevin being an LGBTQ plus person of color, he had a lot of negative experiences growing up, you know, and he was bullied. And so that's why when he said it's so intimidating, someone like you, Cody, that's what he meant. He thought, I don't know how to relate to you being a heteronormative male. And that's not a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's just Kevin's experience he brings to the table.
Yes. And that's the one part of all of these games that is, and I call them games because that's, I mean, it really is, but you do walk into the house or the island with whatever baggage you have with you. And if you come from another season, people will know your baggage. And, you know, so it's a combination of both of those things. And it's really frustrating because there are so many components of yourself that sometimes have to be set aside that you can't focus on because it could have a negative impact on your game. And you have to try to form relationships with people that you might not understand, and you have to try to find a way to connect with them. And so it can be very, very emotional and very difficult. So to ask them to take all emotion out of it it's not possible. It's not. But you also need to remind yourself that you are playing a game. And so certain decisions need to be made based on strategy as opposed to how you're feeling. Even though you might be feeling horrible at that moment, you have to look at long-term game and what is it I need to accomplish right now. And I feel like both of them kind of put that to the side and let their emotions kind of take the wheel instead of them saying, okay, kick it into high gear right now and figure out how you're going to stay.
My wife said something interesting about Keesha because we watched the show, obviously, and we saw Kevin crying to Cody and being upset. But then you saw Kevin in the DR saying, I got to get in Cody's head. I have to do something, you know? But then my wife said, okay, why isn't Keesha fake crying to Cody? Why isn't Keesha why isn't she showing fake emotion and trying to work it in some way when they know Kevin is being, because there was no secret in the house. Kevin was being Mr. Mopey and sad. And I mean, we knew this. Love you, Kevin, but that's no secret.
Right.
So I feel like Keesha could have been like, and should have been like, well, if Kevin's going to do that, let's turn that up a notch. You know,
Yeah, I'm coming in strong. That's right.
Yeah. Well, and that leads us right into the fifth rule, which tells players they need to pretend to be nice. I guess pretend to be mopey is a little bit different, but and play the social game, which is, you know, where that comes in, which includes some specific warnings. Now, these are just specific warnings for the game, not for Keesha here. To act like an adult, not drink too much, don't be lazy or show your bad habits, and keep your politics and controversial beliefs to yourself. Now, you might think
Ronnie loves this. Look at it.
Yes. Yeah, you
Well,
might think.
I did all those things in that.
Yeah, well,
After I came off Have Not, I chugged a whole bottle of wine with nothing in my stomach. I hadn't eaten for 3 days.
Oh no!
And I remember taking my microphone off and jumping in the pool with all my clothes on.
well, and that's
Don't
it. I
drink
mean,
too much.
you might think I wouldn't need to list all those things out, but if you're thinking that, it means you haven't really watched Big Brother. It is a long game with a lot of opportunity to piss off your housemates, and if possible, you really need to avoid all of them.
Yes. Yeah, and I know I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here for just a moment, because this was when you start watching the live feeds, I fall into like a YouTube rabbit hole sometimes, because there's just so many things that come up in your suggestions. And I think it was Janelle. She was like walking, this is one of her previous seasons, and she was walking through the house, and she walked past one person and was like, "Hey, you look beautiful today." And then she walked past the next person. She was like, "Hey, you're a bitch." But it was like, because, and they had clearly been in the house for a very long time. And I was just like, that's so extreme, but it was hysterical, because you're like, and I thought to myself, I'm like, my gosh, if you were in a house with only these people for this amount of time, you would go stir crazy and like things like that. How could you, like, you would say things like that and not even like think twice about it.
To be fair, a lot of people are experiencing that now.
That is true. Good point.
Maybe not with as many people in the house, but
right.
Yeah. Now, of course, for Keesha, it wasn't a long time in the house, and from what we saw, she really didn't have a big problem here. She told Dalton Ross, "Everyone that I went to was like, I love you so much. It's so hard. I don't want you or Kevin to go." No one had anything negative to say, but even she noted that somebody was still getting voted out, and she wondered where she messed up with that connection. And there are two problems here. First, she was still thinking it was all about her personal interactions when it wasn't, as we've discussed already. And second, even in the realm of the social game, because yes, it's not all about that, but obviously it is important. In that area, Kevin did a better job of getting more people on his side socially, which then turned into strategic bonds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that circling back to what I said about Kevin being the first one in Cody's ear after nominations were done. What you have to remember, having won HOH myself, you put up 2, one's going to stay. So you still have to deal with the aftermath of that. So if one of them comes to you, like Kevin did to Cody, and says, "I don't care you nominated me. I'm not coming after you. I just want to stay." Well, who are you going to want to stay?
Right.
And he, again, circling back to another rule we already said Keesha broke, Kevin struck while iron was hot. He got there first.
He did.
Cody had no preference. He literally said this on the feeds. He goes, "Well, I don't know either of them. So, that's why I'm nominating them, since Janelle and Keesha are safe. And I don't really care." Well, once Kevin was in Cody's ear, now Cody cared. Cody didn't have preference.
Well, I'm not convinced that Cody knew who he was nominating, since he kept calling David Kevin. I think he may have been surprised to see the picture come up there when he turned Kevin's key.
Like, oh, wait, that's who I nominated?
Oh, when David...
Crap, I meant the other guy.
When David corrected him, I just went, no. Because David finally, after days that went, David. He's like, "What? Yeah. My name's David." "Oh, well, anyway." And Cody...
Like, moving on. They should all wear like name tags or something for a little while to like help. I do think that this rule, compared to Survivor, is much more important. And because of the circumstances. You're living in a house and you have all of the amenities that you need. You're comfortable, you have plenty of food. I'm watching this just floored at the options that are available to you all while you're there and all of the incredible things you can eat. They're handing out star costumes like we discussed. So there's nothing else to do other than make relationships and get to know people, because you're not out looking for food. You're not fishing. You're not hunting for coconuts. You're not boiling water. You're not having to just do all of these other things that take away from your opportunities to sit and just talk to people. And that's why, like, I'm learning with the live feeds, that's literally all they do. I mean, it's room to room, who's talking with who's whispering with who. And so you have to be very good at maneuvering through all of this and talking to people, and not talking at them, but talking with them. And some people in the house, I'm noticing, are very good at that. They are very good at just having conversations and making people feel invited and that they're interested in them. And forgetting someone's name is a really big indication that you don't care about that person. So I do think that is a strong indicator that you're not forming a relationship with this person because you don't even know what their name is. So I really think, as far as Big Brother is concerned, you got to nail the social game component of it.
Yes. And that is one area where Kevin does, I can speak from experience, he really excels because he is a fantastic listener. He, even if he's like in his head, not really, he looks like he is. And that's all that really matters, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and just to explain how much of a good listener Kevin is. When we were in the house together, he and I had a nasty, nasty fight, like week 4, where he chest bumped me. Production had to be like, separate, different rooms, get in different rooms right now.
Wow.
But even after that, Kevin had formed such a strong relationship with me. I went right back up to him and talked to him. I felt like he was approachable. I felt like he's going to forgive me. We're going to move past this. It's okay. Whereas Keesha wasn't trying to facilitate those or nurture those types of relationships.
Yeah. All right, we could go to the 6th rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. I don't really think Keesha had much to worry about here. Do you, Jessica?
No, I mean, I really think that a lot of what we've already discussed is that, I keep kind of getting this downtrodden image of her, and that, and that's not someone that you feel is a threat to your own game, which is one of the reasons why she was put up on the block, because she didn't have any connections. She didn't come, with other people having her back. She was the easy vote, as we had already kind of discussed, as was Kevin. And so that in and of itself, I think, really showed that she wasn't threatening to anyone else's game, and she should have used that to her benefit, because she could have been like, I'm a freebie, like, use me, I'm a vote, I can join you. But she didn't even realize the power that came from being a non-threatening player, because she didn't have all of those connections. So unfortunately, the one thing that she could have used in, as her, like, hey, look, I'm not a threat, so keep me around because I can help you, she didn't even think to do.
Nope. Exactly.
All right. The 7th rule, which is unique to the Big Brother rules, so you're not going to find this in the Survivor rules, says to trust almost nobody. And while it might seem that it should apply in Survivor as well, there isn't quite as much backstabbing and flipping on a dime in Survivor as there is in Big Brother. As the rule says, just because somebody says they won't nominate you or vote for you doesn't make it true. Although somebody might seem like a good person, although they might have told you the truth multiple times over, it's still not always possible to find one person that you can totally trust. Don't assume anything, especially in a person you have only known for a short while. Well, let me correct myself, and this is still all part of the rule. I'm correcting myself in the rule. You should actually assume one thing, that you are almost always being lied to. Therefore, you must do whatever is necessary to protect yourself. That means if you have the opportunity to keep yourself safe and there are no or only minimal downsides to it, do it. So that's why I ended up, you talked a bit about the safety suite earlier. She had an opportunity to keep herself safe and she didn't.
Yeah.
As she said in interviews, and as you already mentioned, she wasn't ready to compete. Instead of paying attention to the other players who might be playing, she tried to get information from Cody about whether she was in danger.
Right.
Did she really think that he was going to give that away while the safety suite clock ticked down? And then she left her pass downstairs. So when Keesha and Janelle used theirs in the last couple minutes, she wasn't able to do it. And by failing to keep herself safe, she let the other two likely targets pull themselves out of the line of fire, like we mentioned, and left her standing there.
Yeah. She, having lived in the house, for those who don't know, that door that leads to the safety suite, it's up on the second deck there, right off of the HOH room. And there's that little archway there where the upstairs lounge is. I would have had my pass in my hand or hidden in my pocket, and I would have been camped out there waiting to see who on earth was going to go compete. And if I were her, especially not knowing Cody, I would have waited and with 2 seconds left, bolted for that door and swiped.
Which is exactly what we saw two people do, right? They were camped downstairs, but it was like they were watching the clock, and that was it. They both went, which shows that they were very cognizant of what was happening in the house. They were very aware of the circumstances, and they took their fate into their own hands and saved themselves. She was, as David said, in Cody's room trying to get a bug in his ear when it was too late. Like, it's done at that point. Don't waste your time with Cody. You need to move on to the other people in the house. And if you have a chance to potentially save yourself, that's the way to do it. It's at that moment. So I do think that was definitely a huge missed opportunity for her.
Right. And in line with that, don't trust people. Another thing that really hurt her, because as we know, Memphis has an alliance with Cody, right? I mean, they were all in on this and whatever. Right. What really hurt Keesha was the conversation where Enzo, Memphis, and Cody were talking, and Cody mentioned to Memphis, well, what do you think about if Keesha were to get voted out? This was before anything was decided. They were just spitballing. And Memphis's literal response was, oh, I don't care if she goes. And she trusted Memphis, who unknown to her, had huge influence on that.
For sure.
So what Cody and Enzo then heard at that moment was, well, Kevin has made a deal, and he's not going to be mad if he stays. And Memphis doesn't care if Keesha goes. This is win-win.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. It was hard because she kept counting Memphis as about, she'd be sitting there going, well, we have this person and Memphis and da da da. No, you don't.
Yeah,
you never did.
An assumption.
And we're not gonna, this is a spoiler-free podcast, so I won't say anything about anything substantive that happened on the feed since then. But even afterwards, some of them were still talking and saying, oh, if we could have just gotten everyone together, we had enough votes, we just didn't talk. No, you didn't. You did not have Memphis's vote.
Counting votes is huge on any of these reality shows, but Big Brother all the time. See, and having lived in the house, if you pay any amount of attention, you know who's talking to who. You can figure out how that vote's going to go. And they really thought they had it. And I was like,
And the fact that it then was 13-0 just shows that, it was the house rules, really. Everybody, no one wanted to stand out there, and no one wanted to be, having a light shine on themselves. So they all just voted with the house, because I think they did really finally realize, no, we don't have it. So we're moving on, and we're just going to stay safe, and we're not going to have anybody look at us, which I think makes sense, obviously, because you really are very visible then at that point if you don't vote the same way as the house.
Yeah. And that's a lesson Kevin learned our season, week 1 specifically, because Kevin learned that, he wasn't voting, but Kevin knew that he could work the votes in his favor in that sense, because no one wanted to have that crazy of a split week 1.
Right.
All right, there's one more part of the rules that we don't need to discuss yet, but I want to mention it since, it is our first podcast. I said we mentioned the rules, and that's Appendix A, which is about the jury phase of the game and what to do once you get to that point and when you're in the final 2. Obviously, we'll discuss that more later in the season. Certainly isn't appropriate to discuss here.
Not applicable.
No. All right, so with that, it's about time to wrap things up. Ronnie, what are your final thoughts?
As a fan, I'm really disappointed to see Keesha go because I loved Keesha on Big Brother 10. Her season was right before mine. I just think a lot of things we talked a lot about how relationships between the contestants come in, but also what the life we live between our original season and if we get brought back also comes into effect. And, I feel Keesha, she's calmed down a lot since Big Brother 10 as a person. So she kind of came in there a lot more relaxed. And I feel that's who she is now, because I'm 11 years older than I was my season, and I've lived a lot of life since then. So I don't know if I would be the same. I definitely wouldn't,
Right.
And I think that may have hurt her.
Jessica?
Well, between riding bananas and star costumes, this was a hell of a week. I will say that. But unfortunately for Keesha, she saw herself go home. I did really appreciate getting to reintroduce myself to some of these players that I've seen previously and get to know some of them a little bit better. Keesha was someone who I noticed right off the bat was just not really projecting herself like many of the other players were. And so I thought she was going to find herself in a tough spot right off the bat, which is exactly what we saw. It was quite fascinating to watch the shift because there was two other people who were being potentially put on the block who were also very aware of what was happening in the house and saved themselves because they were paying attention. Keesha, on the other hand, I really feel like was sitting back too much and was spending too much time kind of observing, but not really paying attention, if that makes sense. She was seeing what was going on, but she wasn't putting it all together, and she wasn't formulating a plan that would work for herself, like we saw so many of the other players do. And unfortunately for Keesha, she became the easy target, and so did Kevin. But Kevin clearly stepped up and managed to get people to support him and managed to work some deals, and Keesha wasn't doing that. She was trying to be given advice from other people and she wasn't taking it. She really wasn't grabbing the game and trying to save herself. She was letting the game play her, unfortunately. Yeah. And for Keesha, she really did become the easy target and the one that made sense for everybody to get behind and vote, because it wasn't going to cause a ripple effect. It wasn't going to do any damage, and everyone else could go on and play their game. So unfortunately, we didn't see any feisty Keesha this season, but it would have been great to see. But I do think 12 years later, a lot has probably changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keesha was one of the few all-stars who didn't make pregame alliances, and she also didn't have many pre-existing relationships compared to others. That's a bad combination. But the way to fix that is going to work and creating new relationships and alliances. Keesha didn't do that. In fact, Keesha did the opposite. She decided that the best way to play was not to play. It didn't work when she avoided Cody before his nominations, and it still didn't work when she failed to make the necessary connections among the voters and was evicted unanimously. In my original Why Keesha Lost article from her first season, I said being a nice, friendly person got her to where she was in the game, but it usually only takes you so far in Big Brother. Keesha had some of the basics down, such as finding a solid alliance, but she needed to take the next step in being a strategic player. Even today, all these years later, much of what I just said still rings true. After she was nominated, she tried to be a nice, friendly person, but it didn't get her very far because even then she was focused on the wrong things and the wrong people. She didn't even get to the basics of finding a solid alliance this time, and we can definitely say that she unfortunately didn't take the next step in being a strategic player. In discussing how she was sad to be out so quickly, Keesha told Dalton Ross, "I really wanted another chance to go into the house. I mean, I feel like now I'm in ready mode." But now is about 8 days too late. She needed to be ready the moment she entered the house. She didn't need to bang pots and pans or yell and scream like some have done, but she did need to play the game rather than just hoping she would be saved by someone else screwing up. Every time Keesha could have done something to potentially save herself, she just didn't. She didn't talk strategy to Cody before nomination. She didn't try to compete for the safety suite, and she didn't lobby hard for herself once she was on the block. Any of those things might have resulted in a different outcome, but she had to put in the work, and she just didn't. And that is why Keesha lost.
There we are.
Yeah.
There we are. So,
Ronnie, this was so great.
Yeah.
now, before we start to wrap things up here, I wanted to mention that although the rules are different for Survivor and Big Brother, people may have noticed the big poster behind me, which is a great depiction of the Survivor rules drawn by former Survivor player Eric Reichenbach. If you're interested, you can get an 11:17 version of that poster at tinyurl/David or tinyurl.com/David Rules Poster 2. We also have maybe another way you can get a version, and that's so you can have them with you at all times. I didn't have my Survivor props with me here.
I know.
And that is in t-shirt form.
I love it.
Yeah, so that you can go to robhasawebsite.com or robhasapodcast.com, click the merch link near the top, sort the store so the new items are first, and the shirts will be right there.
They're good shirts. You should get one.
Yeah. Now, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Once you'll join, you'll see Rob does just tons and tons of stuff. People who listen to our Survivor podcasts have heard this all. He does at least 9 patron-only call-in shows a month, plus weekly Q&A show with Nicole. He has a weekly trivia game, a bi-weekly patron mafia. In the past 2 months, he's done a 7-hour and a 6-hour patron call-in show. And even when Rob isn't talking directly to people, there's also the patron Facebook groups to keep everybody occupied with a great community of people, including me and Jessica, where you can talk about Survivor, Big Brother, life in general. So remember to go to robhasawebsite.com/patron. And once you get to the Facebook groups, make sure to say hello.
Rob really does an insane amount for the patrons. So you should definitely jump on and get all of the perks that come with being a patron. The Facebook groups really are full of individuals who love all of the same things you love. Clearly, if you're listening to this podcast, you're a Big Brother lover, you are a Survivor lover, and these are the people who are in those groups. So you should definitely jump in there, have these conversations. They can get a little heated sometimes, but it is a great way to decompress and talk about something you love. So you should definitely become a patron, support Rob and all of the wonderful things that he does, because he really gives back so much, and it's you just can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
And that's rare to see. I mean, not often do people give back like that. So
For sure.
Now, Jessica, what are these little
Yes. Let me
here?
see. Can I go this way? All right, there we go. Right here. So now I gotta do this one too.
Yeah.
So
We
all
can't
right,
reach
you
onto
should follow-
hers.
I know. You should follow us all on Twitter. So I am at Jessica Lewis 89. David Bloomberg, who is over here, he is at David Bloomberg. And Ronnie, who is down here, is at Ronnie Talbot. So you should follow us all on Twitter, because we tweet throughout the Big Brother season now. During Survivor, obviously, David and I tweet as well. But you should certainly follow all of us. We put a lot of great content out there for everyone to both listen and read and just, discuss life if you like as well. So I'm at Jessica Lewis 89, at David Bloomberg, and at Ronnie Talbot. So please follow us.
Okay, we need a hashtag. Speaking of Twitter, I have one in mind. I don't know if either of you do.
Riding bananas.
That is exactly it, actually. That is exactly the one I had in mind.
Stop it! Really?
Yes.
Oh, the great minds think
I
alike.
Have it written down right there.
That's amazing.
Oh man.
It's perfect.
Has nothing to do with Keesha, but hey,
Hey,
yeah.
listen,
So
that was a lot to take in. Okay,
Yeah.
that was a lot. Enzo is like burned in my brain riding the banana. So yes, that was a lot.
They slow-moed it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yes,
that's classic Big Brother, Jessica.
Yes.
That's classic Big Brother.
with the music. Oh yeah, the whole thing. I was like, what is
I
happening?
mean, the best part was Enzo said, "I know what you're gonna do. You're gonna slow mo it with music in the background," and they
And-
did. You know?
They did.
What
But boy,
made it better
he was working that banana. He really was. So,
and what made it better was Enzo being like, I don't know, it was kind of fun in a weird way.
Yeah.
it was quite crazy. I will say there was someone, I wish I had the Twitter handle now, but someone tweeted about how they had tried to convince their boyfriend that Big Brother is a game of strategy.
Oh yes.
and as soon as he came in to like check out what was happening in Big Brother, they were riding bananas, and she was like, "Oh my god!" Like face plant, like, yeah, because really, this is that's okay, yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So hashtag riding bananas. And of course, the hashtag for this podcast overall is hashtag YXLost. Everyone should also make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP Big Brother podcasts at robhasapodcast.com or on your favorite podcatcher. We are also on the Reality TV RHAP Ups feed. So if you subscribe to Reality TV RHAP Ups, you'll get both this podcast and our Survivor podcasts, plus so much more. Now, this week, on Reality TV RHAP-Ups, we're celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Bryce Isaiah's Purple Pants podcast. Now, Jessica and I have both met Bryce multiple times. He is an absolute blast to be around.
Yes.
And his podcast reflects that personality and his unique voice. He has guests on and speaks himself on a wide variety of topics, from the hysterical to the very serious. So I encourage everyone to give it a listen if you haven't already. You can start with episode 52, Issa Anniversary, and you can hear it on the Reality TV RHAP-Ups feed.
He's wonderful.
Check it out.
You definitely should. Yeah. He's hysterical, very entertaining, someone you want to listen to, and just full of life. So you can't help but appreciate Bryce and everything that comes with him.
Yeah. Now, people who have heard Bryce speak, I actually saw, I said this on Twitter, I actually met Dr. Issa, ISSA. I met that doctor earlier. It just, and I just wanted to say to him, it's a lot, this is a Purple Pants podcast. But he would have just looked at me like, what is this?
What are you talking about? Right.
So, yeah. And of course, as I mentioned a minute ago, if you subscribe to Reality TV RHAP-Ups, you'll get both our podcasts. Later this week, we will be continuing our journey through Survivor Time, looking at the 12th real episode of Tocantins. I say 12th real episode because on CBS All Access, on Wikipedia, it listed as episode 13, but that includes a clip show. So the 12th real episode of Tocantins, and we will be talking about why Coach lost.
Oh, and then do I get to do thank yous now?
You do.
Okay. All right. So, see, listen, this is the problem, Ronnie. It's so structured sometimes I get a little lost. But here we go. So I'm going to say thank you to Scott St. Pierre for all of the editing that he does, both on the audio and video version of Why Blank Lost. So thank you so much, Scott, for all of the incredible work that you do. And thank you to Will from America for the theme song that you created for the audio version. It's awesome. It's great. It's catchy. I love it. So thank you so much, Will, for creating that. And thank you, Ronnie, for joining us today, because this was super fun. And obviously you come to this podcast with a whole lot of inside knowledge that we don't have. So that's really fun to have, because I've never played Big Brother. So I love this. Lots of good info that we were able to get from you, Ronnie. So thank you. And David, thank you for making this happen. This is great. I loved it. It's a new realm we're walking into. We're heading into Big Brother, but I think it's going to be a good time.
And I appreciate you guys having me. I just want to say that real fast. I really appreciate you guys having me. I love talking about reality TV and Big Brother. And like you said, David, we've spoken for many, many years. So yes, I'm really appreciative.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you in person instead of on Facebook and Twitter and messages and emails when you'd send in your articles back then. So yeah, I echo what Jessica said. Thank you very much for joining us here. And thank you, Jessica, for a great premiere week. So everybody, we will see you. Well, I was going to say next week. We will actually see you in a few days for the Survivor podcast, and then in a week for the next Big Brother podcast. Bye, everyone.
#riding bananas.